good conversation with you. Previously, I had an opportunity to talk to the governor. He's got 8 years as governor. Now that's a challenge. And so he's got 12 years as a county commissioner, what we would call a county commissioner. He's got a couple of years on the city council and some other boards. And so he's been through the mill on local government. And I think one of the things he talked about in my conversation with him is, first of all politics is local, and you focus on the local and your roads and transportation system. And then you look at, how you can become sustainable, through the process of rather than expand out, build up. And so the governor, I think, has a lot of good wisdom for us. He travels around the world, talking to different governments, communities, bringing the message that, we have this small area and we've really got to maximize the use of our space. And so with that, I think, Governor, we're delighted to have you here, and we're looking forward to these pearls of wisdom. And hopefully you'll have time to be here in the community, at least look at my side.
Great. Mayor, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Before I start, perhaps we could take a moment and go around and have everyone introduce themselves and give me a feel in particular where you're from, what your role in life is and stuff like this. We just started earlier, so we'll let you start. Introduce to your colleagues here as well.
Sure. I'm Jeremiah Cromie. I'm a student at Eastern in the Urban Regional Planning Program.
I'm John Everett. I'm retired in the energy industry.
Brendan Rapez-Betty. I'm a graduate of the Urban Planning Program here at Eastern, and I'm the Communications and Customer Service Director for Spokane Transit.
Said hello, right? That's right.
Also the vice chair of SRPCs.
Oh, he hid that from us.
That's right. That back in. It's just get used to it. It started last month. Sabrina Mitchell, executive director of SRPC.
Sean Hartman, City of Spokane, Long Range Planning.
Greg Francis. I'm on the SRTC advisory committee, citizen advisory committee. I'm also on the Spokane Planning Commission.
I wouldn't say just a citizen. I mean, you're the reason we're here, and if pure citizens get equal vote, then we'll make decisions here tonight. You have 50% of the vote. Mayor, I appreciate your introduction. Let me just tell you that a couple of years ago I was introduced in Chicago. I was giving a speech there, and it was on gender equality. And I must tell you, with modesty, I thought I gave a pretty good speech. In the introduction, they said that I had served for 31 years in elected office, which I'm proud to say, by the way, primary and general, 19 elections in a row without having a loss, but 31 years in elected office, and also 27 years teaching at the University of Maryland. And I'm now in my 15th year of heading a national nonprofit, Smart Growth America. And so after giving this speech, as I said, I was fairly put across fairly well, and I asked for questions. And there's one young lady in front put her hand up very, very eagerly and said, I gave her the first question. She looked at me and she says, how old are you anyway? She had added all those things together. Now, as you all know, you can be, for example, a teacher at the same time that you're, especially at local elected office. So I'm not really 107 years old, but I am pleased to be here. There are three distinct careers, but in some ways overlapping. So I'll actually bring in some of my thoughts of different perspectives. You mentioned I speak regularly internationally as well, which I do, but I'll also tell you that my daughter, who is now 16, my wife and my daughter often travel with me. Like she celebrated her 8th birthday in the Great Wall of China, and just recently we were 10 days in India working on sustainability issues and this time. And it was after the India trip when I gave 2 speeches on sustainability to campus-based students and faculty. And they were very polite, very knowledgeable questions and discussion. And then I gave the one on the gender equality issue. Sustainability, about 200 people per speech. Gender equality, at least 1,200 large auditorium, 2 spillover rooms, 85% women, very enthusiastic. So my daughter comes up, she was 14 times. She says, Dad, I have some advice for you. Forget this environmental stuff. Focus on women equality. And so ignored her advice here on these larger issues as well. Let me just thank you for coming out. I know there's so many different things going on, and I want to also congratulate the work that you're doing in terms of the adoption of the 2040 team and the capital budget and stuff like this. All very important work, and thank you for your involvement. And sometimes it seems so far out that it's hard to say, okay, I'm going to give up a Wednesday night, go here or there or whatever. But it's very important. Let me just tell you real quickly about Smart Growth America. We are, as I said, a nonprofit funded primarily by some major organizations, Ford and Rockefeller and things of this type. But our basic belief system is that we believe that quality of life is better when people can live closer to their jobs and closer to their activities, and when people of all incomes have equal access to these opportunities come from jobs and affordable housing. We also believe very much in a shared prosperity. And I know those may sound like a word, but we'll go through some of the things of what is actually happening that impacts that in a major way. One of the things I want to say right up front, and I know this is true for this state, and in fact we've been working throughout the state. Just recently it was in Seattle for a couple of issues. Roger Millar, the Secretary of Transportation, is a longtime friend, in fact former Smart Growth participant, part of our organization as well. And we've worked with him, and some of you know Lynn Peterson, we're closely there as well. But I can tell you, not only here, but in most of the country, change is coming very, very rapidly. And what we have to think about is not only where we are today, but given the change that's going on, where do we want to be, and how can we help move in that direction. Now, when I say change, the first thing that always comes to mind is, especially in this type of setting, is about population growth and the traffic that goes with it and that type of physical change. And that is happening and is going to happen in a major way throughout the state, and throughout this county, throughout this metropolitan area. But there are other significant change in the process unfolding right before us as well. Some of it is that good old-fashioned base politics, and by that I'm not necessarily talking partisan politics, but the question of who pays for what, how are we going to do it, how are we going to reach a decision about where we go, and things like that. The other big change is coming from technology. The technology, in fact, is moving so fast that it's difficult in some cases even to judge what the impact is in terms of trying to keep ahead of the curve. A lot of discussion going on about the disruptive transportation systems that are emerging. By that I mean Uber, Lyft, and things of this type. And what does that really mean? There's been an interesting discussion the other day about electric automobiles. And a number of states are making major efforts, including my little state of Maryland, to expand the use of electric automobiles, and they are geometrically increasing in use and everything else as the technology improves, except for one fundamental issue that we have to keep in mind, and that is there's no such thing as a free lunch. And so the fact that people are driving electric automobiles doesn't necessarily mean that we're not using energy and that we're not producing carbon emissions. It just means that instead they're produced in a power plant over here, then sent into wherever the charging station is. But assuming there's some emissions coming from the charging station and some fuels being used, we still haven't solved the overall issue of sustainability, emissions, climate change, things of this type. And so with that general introduction about change, let me start by, make sure we get this correct now. This is Denver, and I put it up for a reason, and that is that Denver has undergone very, very dramatic fast change, and particularly in its population growth, but overall in terms of its composition and the way it's growing and everything else. It has, for example, in the last 5 years, had 2% per year annual growth, and it's added over 100,000 people in the Denver metropolitan area just in the last 7 years. It has adapted for that by putting some new transit and bus rapid transit systems, but most importantly, it made a number of fundamental changes in its actual planning and land use to try to accommodate them. The long-term mayor there, John Hickenlooper, is now the governor, but years ago he got with some business leaders and said, you know, hey, we're growing and we want to grow, but how do we grow in a way that makes Denver better and not worse because of traffic jam and everything else? And they came through that. I might tell you, by the way, John Hickenlooper, in my mind, stand for a long time because my son and I were there for the 2008 Democratic Convention, and we're talking to then Mayor Hickenlooper, and he had 6 breweries. And we decided in celebration that we were going to go and visit each of those 6 breweries. We were restrained and didn't plan to end up like CNN or something like that, but we visited each of them. So to me, that's a mayor. I mean, a mayor that has 6 breweries right in the town that are coming in. They were, by the way, all in old mill buildings. He was a revitalization real estate person that did that. But the same changes are really occurring in a rapid growth, the decentralized growth, and the challenges facing it for Spokane as well in the entire region. And what these changes are doing is pushing a movement toward smart growth. Now, I say movement toward smart growth. You don't have to use the word smart growth. I suspect a number of you don't like the idea at all, and that's fine. And I talk to a lot of groups who never use that term. That you can use about any term as well, but the principles are probably about the same. And that is, I'm talking about toward a more walkable community, toward mixed use, toward infill reinvestment before you sprawl outward, toward transit-oriented communities in many areas, depending on the density and so on. And when I talk about that, most people tend to think, oh, he's talking about the very large communities, because that's where a lot of it is used, and that's where a lot of it says. So a lot of people think instantly, he must be talking about New York or DC or LA or something like that. But that's not necessarily true. You go a step down to places like Seattle or Portland, or if you go to Spokane with a little over 200,000 people, or one that I love, we have a little old town in Maryland called Berlin, Maryland. Berlin, Maryland has only about 4,800 people. It has become a growing area, young people moving in, but they're moving into the downtown, if you call it downtown 4,800, the downtown area, because it has really captured an ability to define its niche on a kind of directed growth using about 140 historic homes that they have there, bed and breakfasts, that people come there and things of this type. But the changes are occurring in all sized communities. And as they occur, part of the thing to keep in mind is you don't want to just say, okay, we're going to build inward or we're going to stop sprawl or whatever. But you have to keep what I would call context and good design in mind. This is South Bend, Indiana. It is one of our kind of prized organization cities that we work with. And the reason that it is so important is most of those buildings behind there are old mill buildings. variety of mill activities. And for many years, most of them were abandoned as the economy changed. And we went in and we started working with people and we said some basic principles. And you can see the basic principle, and it was consistent with a town of the size of South Bend and the history of South Bend. And we said, redo these, and it really ought to be retail commercial on the ground floor. And then above that, you know, it can be anything. Who cares? It could be residential, it could be condo or apartment, it could be office building, it could be any mix of it, because you don't really care other than preventing noxious uses like fumes or something. And it can be something that's exploding across the country that you ought to keep an eye on, micro-manufacturing. Micro-manufacturing, literally, for example, like medical technology equipment, can be done in a room this size here and be very successful, and it can just as easily be in one of those buildings right there. But what the city leaders did is we said that, you know, you had to reduce the size of the roads and lanes going through. It should be two-way traffic. It's too much one-way traffic with adverse impacts. And the sidewalks should be both landscaped and very wide and inviting of people. And I will guarantee you, if you went back to South Bend 15 years ago, you would not see that same scene. You would see, some of you probably know it, row after row of abandoned mill houses. And this, by the way, throughout the Midwest, throughout New England and places like that, is a dominant change pattern for these old, large buildings that have been abandoned into very productive use like that. Now, these are not just occurring. I like to tell people the changes are occurring because of my great speeches, but very few people really believe that. But what is happening is that there are several major forces that are going on right now that are impacting growth and growth patterns. And these forces are out there no matter what I say or no matter what you all do, you like to do individually or collectively. And the question is sort of how do you respond to the forces? First of these is the changing demographics. Demographics, population mix is changing very, very dramatically. When I talk about changing, both the millennial generation, which a lot of people talk about as it is emerging, but also, and by the millennials, we're talking about those who just entered the job market or those who have started young families and things of this type, and the combination with the baby boomers and the changing patterns of where the baby boomers are living and what is going on. The important, and we've done, along with others, a lot of research on this, but the important thing to recognize is this is the population, and you see the two booms that are occurring there, and the population is bulging, and that bulge is getting larger each time, with the more people moving into the baby boomer age now, increasingly 60 and over, and more people moving into the millennial as the last population spurt occurred. We are slowing down the number of people being born and all, but that is the baby boomer spurt as well. I want to come back to their preferences in just a second, but what does this mean as a practical matter? I'll give you, and I don't want to overwhelm you with figures and will not be doing too much of this, but in 1960, 48% of households had children. That's roughly 50% of every household had children. Others were obviously single young adults who are often elderly and so on. By that 1960, by 2000, that figure had dropped to 33%. So we went from half of our population being households with children down to a third of our households with children. And the projection is by 2025, 7 years from now, that's going to be down to 28%. So roughly a fourth of our households will then have children. Think of the dramatic difference this makes in terms of the housing stock and what is needed and what is going to be demanded, as well as the impact on the job market, on the service market, and everything else. Looking at it from a slightly different perspective, the single-member households are projected to be 28% in 2025. In 1960, our base year was only 13%. And so you have more than double the number of single member households. And this does not appear to be like temporary, graduate from college and for 2 or 3 years, I'm living by myself, I'm going to get married, settle down, and have a family of 4 or something like that. It appears that we're seeing fairly permanent patterns setting in. The other big one in terms of the change is the baby boomers. The baby boomers increasingly are people like me, in case you didn't notice. Although I must tell you, I tell my daughter, she saw a picture of me and she says, your hair used to be really black. And I said, yes. And I said, I want to tell you something. I've earned every one of these in 31 years in elected office and 16 years of you. She looks at me and she says, Dad, all baby boomers get cranky. But in any case, I am proudly one. But what we have to think is there's a change going on in the baby boomers, a major change. The old thinking was that you would retire about 60. And then, I don't want to be crude or blunt, but you would die about 70. I mean, that was the thinking that went on, and many of our institutions were set up that way. In fact, that's a little bit of the problem with the Social Security. And then in the 50s and 60s, when you started adding things like Medicare and Medicaid and individual retirement programs, things of this type, they were all geared on the assumption that you retire about 60 and you move on about 70. Well, that's no longer the case. Today, if you retire about 63 and you are in reasonably good health, the odds are overwhelmingly that you're going to live in reasonably good health until at least 83. Now, if you stop and think about that for a second, what does that mean? Well, increasingly, a lot of the baby boomers stop there and they think, wait a minute, I don't want to, in our part of the country, they would say, so many would move to South Carolina or Florida. And so they think, I don't want to go sit on the back porch for the next 25 years in South Carolina, or whatever the equivalent would be here. Or I don't want to go to a retirement home for the next 25 years. And they also say something else very important. I can't afford to. Because the institutions and the retirement systems are set up generally mean that a person cannot move out of the earned income for 25 years or more and have any reasonable quality of life. And so what that really means then is that they want to and must be an ongoing, active part of the community. They're not moving away. They want to what the AARP calls this aging in place. They want to age in place. What it also means, though, is they don't want that acre-and-a-half single-family home out in the suburbs. They don't want the hour commute to go to work or even go to the theater or whatever. They want walkability. They want opportunities to participate in the community, and they want opportunities to work. I mean, it may well be part-time in Starbucks, or I guess we should say Pete's or something of this type as well. Or it may be continuing in the same profession or starting in a new profession. A number going back to teaching and things of this type. And so what we find, though, is that both groups, the millennials and the baby boomers, demand almost the exact same type of community of living style. They want walkable communities, they want mixed-use communities, and they want, if possible, transit and less driving. And they are surprisingly similar lifestyles that they want. And so what we really have to do is consider these changing populations and their changing needs and what it is that they expect. I'll tell you, my son Raymond, who is now 39 years old, has his own company. He and his wife live in the District of Columbia. He's been a traditional millennial type and is thinking since he entered the workforce. He doesn't mind working at 9, 10 o'clock at night. But when he goes down that elevator, he wants to be able to walk across the street, meet a couple buddies, have a drink or two. I'm assuming they have coffee, but have a drink or two there, Then he gets on the DC subway system, and he goes 2 exits to where they live, and he and his wife then walk, I actually find it so strange, but at 10 o'clock at night, they walk to a choice of any one of a dozen different restaurants and have dinner together many nights outside. This is a style that just has emerged. And what it also means, though, is that they are looking at the same thing, perhaps earlier hours, that the baby boomers are looking at. They want that type of walkable. They want to be able to work and then to walk home and maybe go out afterwards or whatever. Not far from where our office is in the District of Columbia, New York Avenue, there's been, maybe 15, 20 condominium buildings constructed just in the last decade. They're all very traditional smart growth in the sense of, again, the retail on the ground floor are located fairly walking distance to a metro station and so on. But I've talked to a couple of the people who are doing the building, the owners of the companies, and one of them, the Zudo company, and he says, they're having the funniest thing because he said the millennials and the baby boomers are competing for exactly the same units. They want smaller space. They're much more interested in the quality of life, the accessibility, the mixed use, the walkability, than they are in having these large units or this norm. Now, I'm not saying for a moment everyone is going to change and give up every subdivision and that no one's going to live in a single family home. But I'm telling you that the overwhelming majority is moving in that direction. And so as you're thinking through, okay, we have rapid growth coming, but who's going to be in that growth? And what are their expectations about what will work? Changing the way we do things really becomes extremely important, but it also becomes important for good old common fiscal sense. From both the public sector and the private sector, it becomes a matter of bottom line analysis. In other words, when you sprawl outwards, when you extend the boundaries and move outwards, or you annex area, you are in fact incurring new sidewalks, new roads, new water and sewer lines, new service delivery areas for your ambulance, for your police, new school needs, all moved out. And so the question becomes, can you save significant amount of money by infill and by reuse and by different types of development in existing areas? And the same thing is true. We have a part of Smart North America now called locus. Locus for the Greek word place, not these everything. But locus is made up of business people, primarily from the development community, who have discovered that it is in their interest, in fact, to work with local government, to have the mixed use infill development, because it saves significantly on their bottom line. And among other things, what we say, for example, to local governments, if you're doing a lot of infill and you've got mixed use and you've got walkability and maybe transit, then one of the first things you ought to think about is moving away from the mandatory 2.4 parking space per residential unit, which is what most places have. I mean, most of the people will be walking and you got mixed use zone, why still require it? Well, if you're a builder and you have to provide for every single unit 2.4 parking spaces, you have eliminated a huge cost from that, or at least reduced a huge cost. Now, we tried to look at this from a variety of perspectives, and one was we said, okay, what is going on in terms of economic development? What is really happening here that is causing the significant change that we see in place after place? And if you look at Pittsburgh, or as I tell people, even Cleveland is making a dramatic comeback. And then you look at the smaller and the mid-range ones, and you say, well, what is happening? Well, one of the things we find is that business after business have made corporate relocation decisions, moving from the suburbs, from office parks, or just suburban sprawl, into an urbanized area. Now, by an urbanized area, I'm not necessarily saying just downtown or just a big city. I'm saying a urbanized suburb or an urbanized smaller town in the sense of some of these principles. And the study, and I emphasize, by the way, all of this is online on our website, www.smartgrowthamerica.org. You download any of the studies for free and so on. I meant to talk about this one. before I jumped off on core values, but some surveys were done by the National Association of Realtors as well as Portland State University, and looked at the preferences of this. So what you see is that both the baby boomers and millennials increasingly prefer the walkable communities over the sprawl type subdivision. And what you also see, though, is on the bottom, the millennials that were born 1981 or later, a strong preference of moving in that direction. That's one of the emergent groups. Now, when I talked about the changes that are occurring, we did this study called Core Values, and we asked people that made corporate decisions, 500 different business corporate decisions, to move into an urbanized area. So, for example, General Electric moved from suburban Connecticut to downtown Boston. In our immediate area, for example, Marriott moved their headquarters from a large single freestanding office park into downtown Bethesda, which is a suburb, but still a very urbanized, walkable, mixed-use transit suburb. And what we found was that 82% of the corporate leaders said that they made the decisions because they had to follow the workforce. And the shiny brights coming out of college, the millennials today, want a place where there is a place there, or as we say, there's no there in so many of these areas. And they're not going to go. Now, this is one of the more famous research parks. It's called the Golden Triangle Research Park. It's Raleigh, North Carolina. It's Golden Triangle because it's got three major universities, Duke, North Carolina, and North Carolina State. And for the longest time, major high-tech companies, medical research and everything else, had their headquarters right there. They started losing tenants. And they started losing tenants to downtown Raleigh, downtown Durham, and things like this. I talked extensively over the last several years with the woman who is in charge of the park overall. They are now redoing it, and they are infilling with major residential components. They are making it walkable. They are putting amenities like the pond and so on. And at the bottom of all of their buildings, they are now putting retail activities. So that same person coming like the sun down the elevator will have a place to go. This has become the norm. The old office parks have disappeared all across the country. And the more we looked at that, the more it became very clear to us. And again, I urge you to go ahead and get our study. It's called Core Values, and it's available on there. But what we found, if you look over here, what we call the walk score, average American takes 7 trips a day, to and from work, kids to and from school, out to dinner, stop to cleaners, whatever. And the greater you can walk to a number of those, the higher your walk score would be. What we found was before the move and after the move, those were the change in the walk scores. And that's what the millennials look for when they decide where do they want to go. Now, I must tell you personally, I find it strange when I came out of college, you went where the jobs are. It didn't make any difference. And I was born in New York, grew up in Florida, and went to Maryland just because that's where the job offer came from. Now people say, give the jobs to me because I want to live here in this beautiful community or whatever. The third force that's affecting us in terms of our decisions is the issue of climate change. And we urge in terms of climate change to look at both sides of the equation. That is both what is causing climate change and the mitigation of that, and then the resiliency of how a community survives this. I know this is often a political question, and so you can debate it in different ways and what the actual cause is and so on. I happen, and this shouldn't surprise you, come from the camp to believe that human behavior is causing, if not the overall climate change, a great increase, and that's going to get significantly worse. And what we're talking about here is I live in Annapolis, and Annapolis now gets sunny day flooding 4 or 5 times a year. Sunny day flooding means just the tidal coming up Fortunately, it's still relatively small, we can handle it, but it's a clear warning. Other places, from fires to droughts to these microbursts, they are there. And so what we urge is that people look at both sides in terms of development pattern and figure out how can we reduce, because the storms that we see and that we all are so familiar with are so common. I mean, these are the obviously a couple of ones that everyone knows. Sandy has hit New York and New Jersey, or the recent two that hit Houston, Texas. But part of the question then becomes, are there ways we can do things that will help reduce the contributions to climate change? And the issue is, if you have less sprawl, less emissions, more walkability, by definition, in fact, when I talk about sustainability, I sometimes say to people, the best way to save energy is not to use energy. And so, of course, they look at you like, okay, he's had that glass of wine before dinner. But that's not the case. What it says simply is, if you have mixed use and walkability within a community, and people are not forced to get into a 2,000-pound car to drive 2 miles to get 1 quart of milk, you are moving sustainably and you are having an impact on the environment. And so we urge that people look at this. The other side is to figure out ways to lessen the impact when a climatic event does hit. And that is to understand that there are things we can do here and now that will dramatically change the impact. Sandy is an example. In Sandy, the state of New York used a lot of the recovery money, and they bought out, voluntarily, but they bought out a large number of smaller communities, individuals' homes, and they relocated people, helped people buy homes about 3/4 of a mile further back. And they used that area as what it originally was, which was a large swampland marsh area that absorbed the ocean waves. New Jersey decided to rebuild exactly where it was, exactly the way it has been. And they committed, we're going to return people to their homes, we're going to return people to their community. It's as if New Jersey somehow thinks there will not be another Sandy in the very near future. And there are so many different things that we have to go through, and I'll come back to a couple of them in just a second to think this through. But the third force of change and causing this change is the change in the intergovernmental system. I know that topic gets you all excited. And so, oh my gosh, you're going to talk about intergovernmental relations. That's exciting. Actually, I thought my first book was federalism. I liked it. No one seems to get that excited about it. But it is a force out there right now that's causing major change. And by major change, what is happening is that the federal government is increasingly less and less involved in infrastructure decisions, infrastructure funding, and transportation decisions and transportation funding. It used to be a major player in all of this. Now, this is not just, by the way, about this administration. This withdrawal for a variety of both fiscal and political reasons has been going on for a couple of decades. And what you're seeing is much more state and local government are increasingly on their own in terms of deciding about infrastructure, funding infrastructure, and building it. And to the extent that that continues, it's both good news and bad news. It means state and local governments have far more power, more capability to make their own decisions. It also means they're going to find ways to do it. And one of the ways to do it is sort of like on the energy sustainability, save energy by not using energy. Well, one way to do it is save a lot of money by not causing sprawl that causes you to build more roads and more fire stations and do schools and all just to accommodate sprawl, if you can accommodate the same growth, dynamic, economically positive growth in existing areas. And there are a number of other things we have to think through. Do you really want to add lanes to an interstate to move people from one point to another point, or do you want people to move much, much better by investing in the infrastructure in that development area itself? And you can go through all of these types of changes. Given these changes, though, And I won't go through detail because they're available on our website, but I want to give some examples and we can take question answers on them. But we have developed, we work with a lot of people all over the country, different tools and policies that work to try to maximize the best potential of these changes. There are a variety of different things. One is mixed use, and this is a fairly close neighbor, Boise, Idaho. But what they have done is a significant attention to a lot of the different things that we've been talking about, but most importantly, they focused on mixed use, and they are bringing development into the downtown and immediate environments of Boise. They are also becoming very, very competitive, including for economic development competition from Washington, Oregon, Northern California. I mentioned my son before. He called me when he was about 25, 26. He was the deputy political director for ASCII for the union, and he was out there for a couple of months working with city leaders. And he called me and said, "Dad, have you ever been to Boise?" At that time I had not. I said, "No, I haven't." And he said, "I got to tell you, I really like it here." He said, "I could see myself doing it." Well, I want to tell you, if you're a community and you're getting a young millennial saying, "I can see myself living here," you've won half of the battle on economic development. Now, what is happening in Boise right now is interesting. Their knowledge-based part of the economy, their high-tech, is expanding significantly. And a number of them are firms either relocating or overflow activities from existing firms in the Washington, Oregon, Northern California area. And what they have been able to do at a lesser cost than the living cost in a place like Northern California is to have the same quality of life and the same excitement, and so the people are moving there. The next tool, if I can use that word this way, is the issue of density. Now, you have to understand, Americans know what they want in land use, know what they don't want. They absolutely hate density and hate sprawl, and they'll fight against both. If you stop and think about it for a second, that's not really possible. You're going to have one or the other, unless you go into a total no-growth mode. And so part of the question then becomes, which do you prefer? And these are the two traditional patterns of automobile-oriented shopping centers, regional shopping centers outside downtown, or a revitalized, energetic, walkable, mixed-use downtown area. The second slide, this is Akron, Ohio. When you talk about density, one of the things people think that means is you're going to have all kinds of high-rises, multi-stories everywhere and all. That's not true at all. This is a very traditional neighborhood. This was actually done back in the 1920s, and that is a 6-unit apartment building snuggled right between two single-family homes. Recently, I spoke in Greensboro, North Carolina, and they put me up at a historic bed and breakfast place. And in the morning when I started walking around, I noticed our neighbor's almost identical unit there. And I went through this historic district. And in the 1920s and 30s and all, that's what was developed. You would have like Boston Back Bay area. You would have this mix of single-family homes, mix of zero lot line or townhouses or whatever. But the question is design and proportionality and how does it fit in. That is density. Density is not, no one wants to Manhattanize all of America, as some people say. We want to, though, increase the density along this line. The next tool that I'll mention is that of complete streets. Complete streets means that streets should be for cars and for people and for pedestrians and for bicycles and to invite activity on the street itself. The street itself, sidewalks and all, obviously. But this is the type of example of complete streets. This is one of our most successful programs across the country, Complete Streets. We have had now over 2,000 local jurisdictions adopt Complete Streets policies. We're working with them on implementation. It also involves normally having two-way traffic, although this one does not in particular. But we have narrowed the lanes. We have separated, by the way, the bicycle paths from the cars themselves. We have separated. People do not like to walk down sidewalks if the cars are whizzing by right here. They like some separation between them and landscaping and so on. The reason I love this particular side is even before I started thinking of smart growth in this way, that woman walking along there reminded me when I was county executive, and I was coming from where the county seat was in Upper Marlboro to my home in University Park. We went over this bridge, and I'm watching this woman walking across in a mud puddle, and two children carrying the bags. The grocery store was on this side of the bridge went over to the train tracks, and then we had a bunch of apartments over here. And so I remember going back the next day and saying to my staff, why don't we have sidewalks here? So I got a traditional response, well, that's a state road. We don't control state roads. So we wrote to state and said, why don't we have sidewalks here? So we don't put sidewalks on roads like Landover Road, which is where this was. It's a 6-lane highway, 3 lanes each direction. We don't want people there. So I wrote another letter. I said, I don't understand. How do the people get from the shopping center over there if they have to go sidewalk? And so the gentleman says, well, they would have to go somewhere else to shop or get in their car. So 18 months later, I became governor. Can you imagine what my first personnel changes was? I people I did call them in person and talked about policies so that we could change this because we're changing the policies. Well, it was exactly like that. You'll be stunned at how many places all across America there are not complete streets. By the way, I went for a lot of walking downtown here, beautiful places, so many places, but also some are interesting. I saw one where there's the handicap access ramp on this side of the sidewalk, and it's been redone or whatever, and you cross the intersection, and there's no ramp on the other side. There's a curb of 6-8 inches, and so what you have done is strand someone with accessibility challenges in the middle of the intersection. Eventually they're going to fix that, but that's the type of thing we urge for complete streets. The next one is infill development, and it's a strong policy no matter the size of your community for infill development. This is Rochester, New York. They had a large recessed highway that was built back in the 60s with the interstate highway system and so on, and so the cars could whiz through downtown Rochester. The city leaders got together, and they are now rebuilding that entirely. They're filling that in. They're going to have acres and acres of land on both sides for further infill development. They're going to have a 2-lane on each side, but also complete street. And they're going to revitalize this entire portion of the downtown area, which you can see right now. None of those buildings really were oriented toward it, because who wants to be oriented toward a recessed highway? We're working in Buffalo, New York, for example. They just made the decision to eliminate those elevated roads that were constructed along the lakefront. And it was to move the steel trucks along the lakefront to the market. Well, the steel industry like that is not coming back. And even if it is, why would you separate a community from the lake just to have an elevated highway so the trucks could move faster? So all across America, you're seeing this. I said I was walking today for several reasons, sightseeing the park. I didn't have fixed my phone. But in any case, I was out walking. We're at the Doubletree Hotel by the convention center. If you want to see something interesting, take 15 minutes and walk around 3 or 4 blocks. The amount of asphalt surface parking that is in that area, almost every single street has ½ acre, 2 acres of asphalt parking. Right? Well, if you just think about, instead of sprawling out, what if we redevelop right there? And again, it doesn't even have to be multi-story. What if we just added dense development right there. And there are a variety of ways to accommodate the parking. The key on the whole thing is to be done proportional with the design and proportional to the existing communities. It does involve, by the way, if you're going to be successful, a lot of community involvement. And the community involvement, initially, she'll say to you, no, I don't want this here. I don't want this density. But here's what happens. If you go in, we did this in California, in the Sacramento area. It was very interesting. Also in Reno, Nevada. You have an urban corridor, for example, and you say, oh, we were thinking about doing this, this, this. What is it you want? And you start talking to the community, and someone says, well, we really want a general purpose grocery store. Yeah, we need grocery store. Okay, and they have this computer where you generate it immediately. And what else do you want? Well, we can't walk along there. Look at those sidewalks. Oh, you want landscape, sidewalks, and so on. And yeah, I wish there was some place for mom to live around here. You know, she doesn't want to live in this full single-family home anymore. Okay, maybe some small apartments. By the time you get done, the community will normally have recommended greater density and mix of uses than you as a professional planner or elected official would dare propose. And try it sometime. You'd be surprised. You can't say to them, what density do you want? You say to them, what type of community do you want? And that's when you start getting very different answers. One of the things that we've done to facilitate this is something called the Form-Based Code Institute. They've been around for a long time. We just merged them to Smart Growth America. But the Form-Based Code takes a different approach entirely. It says, in earlier days, starting about the 1920s, we said residential over here, commercial here, industrial there, and so on. But for what purposes? And so now what we're saying is, what is the design and the form of what you want? And so the only thing we're interested in is, where's the building located, for example, up to the sidewalk? What is the maximum height, or even the minimum height? Should you have a basic rule like reuse of existing facades in certain districts, like the old mills? Should you have a guarantee of retail on the ground floor? But beyond that, who cares what is up in that third and fourth story of a building? And who cares if it changes over years? The only thing you care about is that there aren't noxious emissions or other problems. When you start talking about investors, developers on this, you'd be surprised how quickly they attune to that, because markets change, things change, and so they're willing to invest in the long term, but they don't want to have to go down the versus a rezone process just if they decide to move from all residential to maybe a two-story of office and 2 stories of residential. Be sure and touch base with the form-based zone and look through it. The other thing, and again, I won't go through detail, we can talk about it, but we're running out of time, but it's transit-oriented development, and we are seeing dramatic changes all around the country on transit-oriented development, including, I mentioned the intergovernmental aspect, where the federal government increasingly is contributing less and less to funding for transit programs, transportation overall, but even more so, less and less for transit. However, in the local jurisdiction after local jurisdiction, they have been adopting revenue sources, which is kind of the ultimate vote. You know, it's one thing to say you want this, you want that, but are you going to pay for it? And if you notice, like in this time period, it's continuing. 71% of the referendum put to voters that required some type of revenue, most often a half cent or cent of the sales tax, required something, were approved and approved overwhelmingly by the voters. And this is continuing even today. And as a result of that, what you're seeing is all kinds of changes. This is the very significant system that's under construction and now expansion, in operation in Charlotte, North Carolina. It is part of the reason I think that Charlotte is moving the way that it is, strongly supported by the business community. It's larger than most of the communities would want or could accommodate here. I understand that. But this is a slightly different one. It's more of a light rail system in Detroit. This is one that is in Kansas City, Missouri. But all of these are recent expansions and approved by the voters. They do not have to be fixed rail. They can be Bus rapid transit, the best model I happen to believe is bus rapid transit on dedicated right-of-way, which makes sure that you're on time. And if you look at someplace like Eugene, Oregon, that has done this very, very successfully. Now, these are the major forces that are causing the change. There are still some big challenges out there. You've got to keep in mind the equity issue. Now, most people don't use that term, and you don't wake up thinking about equity. But there is a great disparity with concentration of wealth, increasingly so in America, in few hands, and the middle class really, really struggling. Struggling to move ahead, struggling to send their kids to college, struggling about pensions with the extent of life and things of this type. And so what we urge is that when you make these type of decisions, that you keep that in mind and make sure that you do not compound the problem. And by compounding the problem, we're talking about if you build, for example, a rail system, and the value of property around there goes significantly higher, and if you cause the middle classes living there now to move further out because they can't afford the price, and now they have to spend more money on transportation to get the jobs back where they used to live, that is not a very equitable solution. And so you have to think that there are numerous approaches and policies that work to help do this. If you're working on a rezoning and perhaps a mixed use and a form-based zoning, and a developer will do quite well under that approach, it is not unreasonable to say that you've got to have a range of housing prices in this development as well. Numerous places are experimenting and doing well on this. One of the ones that has done this very significantly is the Hudson Valley rail yards. Now, this is massive. No one has suggested it's for anything around here. But I thought it was interesting. It was totally public decision-making and working with the old rail yards there that led to this development. Now, the problem is those condominium and apartments now are going and priced outside of the range of most of the middle class that lived in that area before. I went yesterday and today over to Kendall, is that right, where the Kendall section where the old railroads are here? Now, I've got to tell you, that is much more to perspective to the surrounding community. It seems to be a very well-designed community. It is a little bit pushing on the price, but it is walkable. That type of community, again, saying, okay, we're going to do well on this, but we're also going to make sure there's some range of housing types on there, and there does seem to be. This one is a public amenity that was built in Greenville, South Carolina, and the same thing came about. That public amenity, everyone loved it. Everyone loved it. It's a big park. It was over at Old Gorge, and owned by the River and Falls here today. I just absolutely loved it. There's a lot of potential there. It's just back east, we don't have things like urban waterfalls. Unless the water pipeline breaks. But they loved it. Well, in South Carolina, though, this is one of the things they did. But what they didn't do is work with the community, including the business community around there, about what was going to happen. And so what is happening is around this area, very high-priced homes are being built because it's now an extraordinarily desirable area. So I ask you to think ahead as you make your decision. Now, wrapping this up, looking to the future, a basic question becomes, what type of growth do you want? One of the ones that I often point to because it was such a change. I'm not going to go through them all again. But Charlottesville, Virginia, has made several changes. And they sat down with the community and said, you know, what is it that we want in terms of the physical development of the community? If you do that, you can put certain values and certain goals out. We want economic development. We want jobs. Hopefully we want shared prosperity so that there's a range of jobs for everyone and access to the jobs for everyone. We want a certain quality of life. We don't want to contribute to the adverse effects of climate. We want to reduce the impact of climate. And how do you do that? And if you start making some decisions now with those goals in mind. Now, if you don't, I will tell you what happens. It's like in Houston, Texas. Houston prides itself in that for years and years and years, they had no zoning whatsoever. No real planning, no zoning. Only recently have they started with zoning. And in Houston, you just develop and asphalt and permanent surfaces, and when traffic got bad, you just built bigger roads, bigger highways, 16 lanes across. Houston has had 3 500-year storms in the last 5 years. 500-year storm was only expected to come once every 500 years. Now, that's not, the storm itself is not just Houston's fault, although they certainly contributed. But what happened is all those impervious surfaces, all those natural drainage areas that should have been green flood management, were all paved over, all for the automobiles. And now, when a storm does hit, and they're in a certain climatic area that they're going to have more storms, they do not have the ability, the resiliency to overcome that. And I think that part of it comes down then to really looking ahead and seeing these basic questions. Now, basic question, by the way, doesn't just have to be a value, like what do we want to do to reduce emissions to help the climate overall. Basic question that affects a lot of people. Where are my parents going to live? Next 25 years of their life, where are they going to live? Saw that. Where are my parents going? Another one. Where are my kids going to live? I don't want them moving off to wherever it is because that's where the job and that's where the type of community. I would like them to stay in the area where we are now. And how are we going to get jobs in our community that fit the emergent economy? And when you start asking those really fundamental questions, you still come back to the same basic issue. What type of development are we going to do? And most importantly, how are we going to do it? This is just some range of tools. There are all kinds of other things out there, but I urge a proactive thinking about exactly these questions and what solutions are there. And then most importantly, this was my last statement, most importantly, we're going to have to bring people together. This can only be done on a regional basis. I don't mean a big regional government like you all, but regional cooperation, regional thinking this through, and it's also about bringing people together in the communities, and it's also about bringing the business community together with those who advocate for some of these changes. And if we can start to do that, I think we can, in a very dramatic way, redirect our own future. I'll stop there and take questions, comments, personal attacks, whatever it's appropriate. It's a personal attack in your hand, Sean.
I know, immediately. Well, one of the things I struggle with, we talk about the boomers wanting to go into more walkable areas and the millennials also wanting the same thing. So I'm a Gen Xer. Do you see is this more of an age issue rather than a generational issue? So that as the millennials shift into where the Gen Xers are right now, they start to have kids, they start to, are they going to want that more suburban area? And as the Gen Xers age into the boomer area, that they're going to want to move into a more walkable.
Right. That is a very logical, reasonable question, and I get it every time we talk about this. When we first started focusing on some of these changes, I too was of the thought that, the millennials are saying now they really don't want to go to that 800 home subdivision with 1.5 acres where I have to drive an hour and a half every day. And I can understand that, But once they start having kids and all, that's not going to happen. Interestingly, they're not moving back. They're staying in the urban areas. But this is what they are doing. First of all, they're marrying much later. They're having children much later. They're having far less children. Potential problem as well. It's 2.4 people per citizen per population replacement, and it's down to 1.4. So right now it's not even replacing the existing population. It's down, and they're having one. But even then, they're not moving back to the suburbs. And the two things that are going on is number one, and this is the majority of them, they tend to move either to private schools or charter schools. I personally do not like the charter school approach that much because I think it starts to leave people behind, but that's what's happening. The second thing they do, though, is the neighborhood school get much more actively involved. And with the, it's a harsh word, but it's true, and that's what we have to be careful of, but with the gentrification in the neighborhood and the existing urban schools that may not have done that well, you bring a lot of these shiny bright parents into the school system as well. They really start pushing hard. Same things that long-term residents want, but long-term residents may not have the financial skills or whatever to make it happen. All of a sudden you start getting changes there in the schools. But a relatively small percentage, best that we can tell, because of children moving back out someplace, is under 10%, which was a little surprise to me as well. And the same thing in terms of the seniors. This seems to the baby boomers, not only because of finances and convenience, but as more and more friends and relatives stay in the areas, it becomes the pattern, and it feeds on itself, if you will, and more stay, more and more. I mean, it used to be, if you were with a group of retirees, they would all talk about where they're moving. Now retirees, for the most part, talk about where they're going to live, right here in the neighborhood, where they're commuting. They want to stay close to their children, they want to stay close to their grandchildren, they want to be involved, and they want to work. Other questions?
Oh, just as a follow-up to Greg's question, we have what is probably not a typical development pattern here in Spokane, but within the city limits, you would expect traditionally that that is urban. Within the city limits is urban. Outside of the city limits in the urban growth area is more rural. In Spokane, people really view that very differently, where they think that there's an urban core that surrounds downtown. And they want to talk about densification and walkability and all of that. Down there in that urban core, not in my single-family neighborhood, even though I live in the city. So that is one of the particular challenges that we have, is bringing people along to understand what is urban, what is a city, what are fair expectations, what are aspirational expectations. What could help us in those conversations?
First of all, I'd agree with everything that you said, except for your first 3 or 4 words. And the first 3 or 4 words were here in Spokane were different.
No, I said I bet we're not.
Oh, I'm sorry, I misread that.
That's okay.
No, you're not different. Let's emphasize that you're not different. This is a very traditional struggle that goes on everywhere. And it also comes about, there's this fear of densification that somehow or other it means, and I said Manhattanization, that's what they think. It means a 20-story building or even a 10-story building or whatever, massive traffic, things of this type. And so there are 2 ways of doing this. One is some jurisdictions have drawn lines within development lines, within growth lines, and said pretty originally, we'll accommodate exactly that, much more urbanized core. Arlington, Virginia, for example, did that. Arlington, Virginia has a Wilson Highway, which actually is 5 subway stops for the DC Metro. And they took a half mile in each direction, which is basically a walking convenience of the person. And they said that will be a very intense, high density. And we will not permit any further density beyond that line. And this comes down to trust for the elected officials, but they did it. They stuck with it. If you fly over, look at a picture at Arlington today, you'll see this urbanized corridor going right down, very traditional, back then, this was agreed to. Arlington was about half acre, maybe even a quarter acre lots. They were small lots to begin with, but they protected them. Now, other areas have said, no, we're going to have a type of graduation step down. We want you to work with us. Silver Spring, Maryland, where they developed a very urban core, and then they started working with neighborhoods. So, for example, they went from urbanized core to a series of townhouse redevelopments. I live in one of those communities in Annapolis. It's a townhouse, but it's 19 units per neighborhood, which is fairly dense. And so trying to figure out that largely means working with the community. There will be people who say absolutely no, nothing, any circumstances. And the only thing I can tell you that is it's going to have to come down to some public education about what real choices are. Other question?
Well, a question you probably can't answer. I look at Seattle and Manhattanization of Seattle, and my kids are young and live in downtown Seattle, and all the things you talk about. But I see what's really going back, and they'll talk about it too, is homelessness and the issue of quality of life. It's huge in Seattle, huge in Portland, where you walk out your nice 10, 15-story building, or in Seattle, 30, 40-story residential building, and there's people living on the sidewalk, which is horrible, and they feel terrible for them, but it's having a huge impact on their quality of life. And we, frankly, got some of that here in Spokane, too. I live basically downtown, and it's challenging. How do you deal with that? And I know it's not akin to the whole gentrification thing, taking out lower-income people.
Homelessness is a very real issue, and it is across the country. You tend to see it more in communities that become urbanized simply because there are more people there, and it tends to be more visible in the sense of right on the sidewalks and things of this type. The homelessness figures vary greatly, but it's continuing to increase in the country. Now, there are all kinds of studies and looks at it. I do not think that one of the solutions is somehow or other to build massive amounts of public housing, because that's not the problem. The problem is, first of all, about half of the individuals involved in, I haven't seen a national study, I've seen a number of state and local studies, half of the individuals involved have some other significant problem. It's quite often a mental health problem or a drug or alcohol problem or whatever. And that is not a housing problem. No matter what you do on the housing side, that's going to be there unless somehow or other you start to deal with that in terms of appropriate programs or whatever. That has also increased quite candidly with returning veterans that are having difficulties. Even in today's military, we're finding that that's true. And so that's part of it. The other part is there are a number of homeless who are homeless quite candidly for financial reasons. And you find people who are working and living in a car with a couple kids. And that comes down to the question of what I was talking about before, shared prosperity. Can we have jobs where a person can support a family? I mean, it's going to be frustrating for anyone to be in that situation. But imagine actually going to work, taking your kids to school, and then meeting afterwards in an abandoned car behind a shopping center, living there. And this is not as atypical as you would think for some of the homeless. And I think that's part of the reason you are seeing a significant push for higher minimum wages. I saw Amazon just moved to $15 an hour for every employee. Actually, it was misworded. I thought it was interesting. $15 an hour for every employee. What they really said is $15 minimum for every employee. But it was a nice press release. But they're going to do it. And as they were saying, it's for exactly this reason. And so then you get people who I think are primarily financial. On occasion, some housing programs might help a little bit. But that's just nibbling around the edges. The real problem are those who have serious difficulties and those who are financially really pressed and simply cannot afford it. The other thing that I mentioned in terms of being financially pressed, the saddest part in my mind is when an area starts doing really well And by doing really well, rental and sale values go up. And then you end up literally kind of forcing people into one of two things. Either they have to move way out where they can afford something, or they become homeless or at least partially homeless. And living with another family a couple of nights a week and stuff like that. So yes, it's a major problem. Yes, we have to handle it. I don't think the zoning land use issues will handle it per se, other than avoiding the extremes of inequity. How about the last question? Ahmed? You've been uncharacteristic quiet for a mayor.
Listen to a professional, same way. So I thought it was a very good presentation. There's certainly feel the homeless situation. You know, and I look back at making these people make these choices. And are we, you know, that person that lived with the family in the back of the car, you know, did make enough money, what did he spend his money on? Was it, he didn't need, we spend all the money eating, those kinds of things. There's a reason for that, also the support service. One of our builders, you know, Boise, you got a picture of Boise, they have all this, really don't have the support services to support them. And so then that's the choice of the communities. Are we going to allow it?
Sure. And there are places, apparently this is a significant part of San Francisco's challenge. There are places that have an inordinate number of homeless. When I say inordinate, I'm talking about larger than you would expect given the population. And part of it is people are attracted to that area for different reasons, and one of which sometimes is the support services. And so then you run into a tough choice. You as a local official, you as an active citizen, provide some support services. And especially if there are things like dealing with mental health or dealing with a family that has children who have nowhere to go. Or do you say, no, that encourages the problem, so we're not going to do that? It's a tough decision either way. I know a number of jurisdictions have taken some of the old hotels and converted them into, they call them short-term residency. Old days, these were called flop houses, but they're specifically for the homeless. My observation has been truly emergency dislocation. A person loses their job, fire in a home, anything like that. Of course we should provide for that. But when you start doing a old motel as a homelessness shelter, it does not seem to deal with the fundamental problems of why are these people homeless. I know a number of my friends in the faith community were the first to establish this type of shelter, and I understand and appreciate their great concern, but that should not be done based on the assumption that that will solve the problem. So on that down note, why don't we go ahead and stop tonight? I wish you all well, and I'll be working with a number of your colleagues tomorrow from the American Planning Association State Conference, and we'll be talking about some of these issues as well. So your professional planners are going to be coming out with the same message. Great. Thank you.